Hello, and welcome to the Vintage Camper Trailers Boot Camp Online Summit. I'm Denny Stone, and I'm the owner and chief designer at SoCal Vintage Trailer in San Diego. I've been doing this for about 15 years full-time, and I've taught the Vintage Camper Trailers Boot Camp interior design class for 7 or 8 years. And what I'd like to share with you today are some of the things that have come up during those sessions, and some of the things that attendees brought up, some of the things that I've gone over, and hopefully it'll be useful to you in your own design process for your vintage trailer. The things I want to cover are going to include some project planning, design philosophy, space planning, design boards, materials, appliances, and my thoughts on how to best use those elements in your own project. So to get started, let's talk a little bit about project planning. And I want to stress that project planning is kind of what you make of it, but it's kind of an important piece of the puzzle. So it helps you make sure that you're out ahead of a lot of decisions that need to be made and pulling things together as needed. And what I like to do with project planning is to first consider who's the project for. Is it an individual? Is it a family? Is it commercial? Is it residential? What's it going to be used for? So is the project going to be a traditional camping trailer that is going to go on the road quite a bit and be all over the place traveling? Is it going to go out in the backyard by the pool as a cabana? Is it a mother-in-law suite? Is it a B&B? Is it something that's going to be used for concession? So what's the use of the planned project? And in terms of kind of my own approach to these things, and maybe yours, is why is the project being undertaken? I get my biggest kick out of the design process, the interaction with clients, the building of it, and then I want to do another one. And so, if that's your approach, if it's you want to do this for the experience, to exercise some creativity and some skills in building or design, alternatively, it's that process plus I want to go use it, I want to go to rallies, I want to go camping, I want to live on the road for a year, but why is it being undertaken? It might be a different project if it's just because I want to do this and then sell it and do another one, as opposed to I want to do this and have it for the next 30 years and spend my life in it. So getting clear to yourself, why are you undertaking this project can be a useful piece of the puzzle in terms of planning. Where it's going to be used is important. We're in San Diego, we have a temperate climate, but we have clients all over the country, all over the world. We can go an hour and a half from here and be at 125 to 123 a couple weeks ago in Palm Springs. We can also go a couple hours and be up in the mountains where there's snow and freezing temperatures. And so where's the trailer going to go? And again, is it going one place? Is it going all over? Have impacts on planning out the project in terms of appliances and conditioning and different elements that would be useful to know. When does the project need to be completed? If we're working on a particular deadline, then that's a different concept than a more open-ended project. If schedule becomes the driver, then decisions are made differently, and certain tasks might be undertaken differently. But if it's more just a matter of you're going to be working on it, excuse me, weekends and nights and things like that, and it's open-ended, then it drives a bunch of different decisions too, or it doesn't drive decisions in the way that a scheduled project does. So knowing when it needs to be completed or when the target date is important. We use, so in terms of how is a project going to be undertaken, we do almost all the work ourselves here in-house, but we do use subcontractors occasionally for different items. But in terms of your own project and developing and building, it's about how are you going to do it? Are you going to accomplish it by yourself? Is it you and a partner? Are you willing to use friends that have certain skill sets, able to use friends that have certain skill sets? Are you willing to use subcontractors for different parts of the project? Those are important considerations going into it. We've seen so many projects that people undertook thinking they're going to do it by themselves, and they get to a point where they've run out of time or talent or tools or whatever it is, and they ask that they get some help with it. And you'll see Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace kind of peppered with projects that people undertook and they couldn't get through it. And I think part of that is maybe not being conscious of how they were going to accomplish what they wanted to do with the project. So think that through. If it's with friends and family, if it's yourself, if it's using subcontractors. And the next part of that is what's your budget, and does it include things like beer and food for friends to come over and help, or cost for subcontractors? If it's yourself, and then it's primarily about materials, unless you're taking time off work, then there's that consideration. But the who, what, why, where, when, how, and how much are all considerations that go into kind of visualizing how your project's going to come together. I have a design philosophy, and I'll talk a little bit about that, and then talk about maybe how to develop your design philosophy as well. We have done like museum restorations where we bring things back to original and are religious about how things were put together, even in terms of using slotted screws instead of Phillips head screws, and that is an approach. It's not really a design philosophy that we use consciously. I'd rather think about our design philosophy as updating things, and there's a danger in going too modern with a vintage trailer, and so that things look out of place and it looks like any other trailer at that point. But my design philosophy is really I try to put things together, design them and build them in a way that looks like the finished product might have come out of a good design studio in whatever era it was originally built, 50s, 60s, 70s, come out of a design studio rather than a factory. And so it feels correct in that the references in furniture and finishes and fabrics and all of those kind of things feel like they could have come out of a period, but they're done in such a way that it works better together than it might have originally. So that's kind of a key consideration in just overall design philosophy for me, is make it look like it was just a better done project than it was when it was originally done. The design itself is really centered on the use. A design for a family with little kids and a dog that are going to go camping can be quite a bit different than a design for a writer that wants to go on the road and spend time contemplating and being solo and living and working out of a project, or even different than a retired couple that may have health needs that need to be accommodated through the design. So understanding and thinking through those things has an important impact on the design that we use. And then one thing I always try to remind people and to keep in mind is it's a trailer, and it's for fun use. It's not too often I see designs that end up looking like a suburban kitchen in a tract house, and while they're nice, they're not any different than what could be done in some other venue. So keeping in mind that it's a vintage trailer, it's for fun use, lets us get away with some things that we might be hesitant to use in something that's being designed for resale purposes or everyday use. Make it fun, make it a little lighthearted. The other piece of that is in design. Everything materials cost money, and some of them cost a lot of money, and some of them are more economical. And you can look for ways to get the biggest bang for the buck for things that end up costing more. And I'll give you an example of this, which is it's a bamboo plywood product, and I had these samples for probably 3 years before I found the right project to use them in, because stuff costs $1,400 for a 4x8 sheet of bamboo plywood with this routed texture and this finish on it. And so it's not something that every project or very many projects could justify using. But when the right project came along with the right budget, we used it sparingly. We bought one sheet of it, and we used it for one bulkhead and the end of a cabinet next to a refrigerator. And my point there is that you don't have to spend tons of money on everything, but there might be some elements that make sense to splurge a little bit on because you love them and because they're going to have high impact. And we'll talk a little bit later about how to find bargains on those kinds of things, but that's part of the philosophy also, is we don't just spend a ton of money on every single element that goes in. Some things make sense, some things don't, and being conscious of that can be really useful. So for your own design philosophy, I think it's useful to consider what's the feel that you're looking for. Is it something really calm, or is it something that's really exciting? Those are kind of a spectrum. Is it kitschy? Do you like the do you like the 50s diner stuff? Is that kind of the look that you're going for? And that makes sense for a lot of people. Is it traditional? Do you want to get back to the roots of the project and have things that look well used but well taken care of or well loved? And that's certainly a design philosophy and a look that can be accomplished, a look and a feel that can be accomplished. Do you want things to look refreshed, up to date? Do you want things to look new, but maybe you want them to look European versus kind of an American design? It can be, at one end it can be really efficient, and everything's got its place, and it's like a little boat interior, and nooks and crannies, and that's a philosophy. Or it can be extravagant. It can have chandeliers and fabrics on the wall. Can have kind of crazy stuff. So just think through for yourself what you want out of this, and keep in mind again that it's a vacation space or it's a workspace or whatever it is. But in most cases, you're not living in it full time. So something that you might not want to be exposed to every day of your life, but that is fun when you're on vacation or fun when you're on the road. So perhaps you can push the envelope a little bit. And then I guess finally is in design, it's like you can be kind of referencing things. And so if what you're looking for serenity, it's like, don't go to Michael's and buy a sign that says Serenity and put it in the trailer and think that means that it's going to be serene. It's like, no, where do you go, or where have you been, or what environment do you picture yourself in where you feel serene, and then start creating those things. If it's nature, then maybe you bring in some natural elements. If it's the beach, then maybe it's a beachy look. But again, it's reference, not literal necessarily, if that makes any sense. In terms of space planning, again, we would start out thinking about, what's the proposed use going to be, and so that drives a lot of decisions. And part of that is because of the limited space that we have. And so if you're very conscious of how you want to use or anticipate using the trailer, then you can discard maybe a lot of things that don't support that use or that aren't important for that use, and you can start prioritizing things. And so if it's I want a really comfortable reading nook and a place to sleep, that's a space planning approach, or informed space planning in some ways. If you're a cook and you want to cook inside this thing, then you're going to have requirements in terms of appliances and power and space and storage that you might not have if it's a use as a reading nook. And so, how am I going to use this? I want to cook for friends and family. I want to go in there by myself and read. I want to socialize. I want to have a whole bunch of people come in and have drinks with me and listen to music. Those things all start to inform the planning for spaces. Keeping in mind that you're designing basically in a hallway, and so a trailer is kind of a hallway, and so there's a very kind of linear feel to them, and so everything we're doing is going to be in a hallway. So what uses I have and how do they coordinate with one another, keeping in mind that it's a small, narrow, long, potentially space. When we do space planning, we do drawings, and some of the drawings are really complex, large format drawings. If we have to submit them to health department agencies and things for different commercial projects, we do. But we also do very, very simple space planning, where we do a layout, where we draw on a piece of paper, or we do it with blocks in PowerPoint, or we find some simple CAD or drawing program that lets us get our thoughts down on paper. And the thing we always start with is, what's the footprint of the interior of the trailer, and what are the fixed elements that we have to work around in that. And those include the entry door, those include windows, those include wheel wells. And so those are things that are always a consideration when we're starting to lay things out. You'll also have things like, if there's an air conditioner on the roof, if there's a vent on the roof, being aware of where those things are can impact your lighting design. But drawings can be very complex, they can be very simple, but they're always very useful, both in getting your thoughts down on paper, communicating to other people, figuring out what will fit in different areas, and a really, really good place to start in understanding the space. The next iteration of that beyond drawings would be in your garage, for example. If you don't have the trailer gutted, is in your garage is kind of marking out on the floor with masking tape the perimeter and the fixed elements, and then starting to feel how much, stick a cardboard box in for a stove and countertop and toilet and things like that, and start feeling what it's like to move around in the space. If you've got the trailer and it's gutted, do that by all means in the interior, but if you don't, mock it up in some way. The topic of storage has always come up when we talked about space planning, and my first point in terms of storage would be leave it home. So don't bring it with you is one way to kind of think about space planning and storage. The other is back to how are you going to use it. When we've bought old trailers from estates and things like that, we've found them so often crowded with so much stuff, and we go through them and there's things that have been there for years and years and years that nobody ever touched. So the primary concept is don't bring it if you don't have to, and then build the storage for the kinds of uses that you're going to make of it. And I'll give you one example. We had a Airstream motorhome that we did several years ago, and it was a family with 2 adults and 3 kids. And what we did is we built a wall unit with 5 open shelves on them, and then we put a different color of each of these wool hard-sided baskets in each of those nooks in there. And the concept was the family, each of the member of the family, including the little kids, had one of their own baskets like this, and they got to bring whatever would fit in this basket as kind of their personal things along on the trip. Books or stuffed animals or video games, whatever it was, if it wasn't a general use thing, would go in one of these baskets. And so even if it's not a family affair like that with your project, think about components like that you can pack and then place in the trailer instead of just shoving things in cabinets and forgetting that it's in there. But go back to what can I leave home, what do I want to have with me on the trip, and what are ways that I can make it accessible and apparent that it's in there so I don't forget about it. I mentioned earlier, if your use is you want to cook a lot, so think about that in terms of your space planning. A bigger kitchen's required for more extravagant kinds of cooking. A lot of times what we're seeing is people are actually doing their cooking outdoors, and so we don't have to plan a big kitchen, but in other cases we've got pretty sophisticated cooks or chefs that want a functional kind of high-end kitchen in the space, and just be aware of what that takes up in space, not just in terms of the appliance and the sink and the fixtures, but in the materials, the components, the food products that need to be on hand and stored, and then the requirements in terms of the equipment, both in terms of power, whether it's gas, electric, in terms of venting, both in air intake and exhaust for gas appliances. That's one significant area that either has a big impact on the interior design and space planning, or it can have a minimal impact depending on how you feel about how much cooking needs to be done or you want to do in the trailer. The bathroom is another area that takes up a lot of visual space because it has floor-to-ceiling walls, and so considerations on we definitely want a toilet, we want a plumbed toilet with a tank, we want a sink in the bathroom in addition to the sink in the kitchen, we want a shower, maybe it's a wet bath, maybe not, but all of those things have pretty significant impacts both on space and on cost in terms of building out some of the infrastructure that, like a shower pan, for example, and ceiling walls and things like that have a big impact. So, we've had full bathrooms, we've had toilets with an outside shower, that can have heated water just to rinse off. And so there's a whole kind of spectrum of ways to approach the bathroom, but being conscious about it up front will help you see how much space you need to allocate both physically and visually for an enclosed bathroom. Sleeping space goes back to how many people does it need to accommodate, and are you comfortable with maybe one permanent setup and then another that's convertible. A lot of people have a hard time after a while with setting up and taking down a convertible bed every day. So the table drops in and the cushions get reconfigured and the sheets go down and etc. And it just turns out to be this big ordeal going back and forth every day. But it might be necessary. It might be the only way to accommodate it. But knowing who's going to be using it and how much is important. And I would, again, it's depending on your goals for the trailer, but if it's for your use and enjoyment and, you're going to do it yourself and it's something you can see yourself using for 5 years or whatever, don't necessarily do it for resale, or if anybody tells you no, it needs to sleep 6 people or it's not going to be worth it. It's your own project, and so do it the way you want. And if you want a sleeping area in the back that's dedicated and you want one up front that can be convertible, or you want the front just to be a couch that you can hang out on and read, then it's completely up to you to do that. But my point is kind of be aware of what the implications are of taking up and setting up and taking down and all that kind of stuff. So sleeping areas depend on how you're going to use it, who's going to use it, how often it's going to be used. Nobody that has a B&B really wants to have a convertible set up in it, because then you've got your guests trying to set that up and take it down every day, and it just never works out that great. A lot of times what our projects are trailers that are used for socializing. So people go to rallies, and a couple will go to a rally, and they want their friends to gather around, and they have an area set up outside, but they want to be able to gather inside too if it gets cold or it's raining or something. And I'll give you an example of how conscious planning for socializing can actually really pay off. We don't go to a lot of rallies, but we go to Modernism Week in Palm Springs almost every year, and they have a vintage trailer show there. And we've had years where we've had 5 or 6 customer trailers there that we've done, and then we'll bring something ourselves. In one particular year, I think we had 4 or 5 customer trailers, and these were big, extravagant projects, Spartans and Airstreams, and all oriented on one row. So we had all of our customers kind of together, and there were probably 80 trailers overall there. But what we brought with us that year was this little 12-foot canned ham that we built, and we built 5 or 6 of them new, but they were vintage-looking canned hams. They were 12 feet long, and we called them the hamster. And so we had one that we built primarily as a social trailer, and so it had a comfortable couch in the back of it, had a console across the front with a flat screen TV, and we had a video playing, a fireplace on it, and we had Bluetooth speakers and just really warm wood and good lighting, and it was designed as a social space. And so one night, on the Saturday night of the vintage trailer show, after all the public guests leave, they come in during the day, they pay an admission fee, and then they all go away at night, and then it's just the owners and the builders like myself that stayed around, and there's a party, a dinner, and a party that night. And I remember coming back from another area and walking down this row of all these huge, extravagant, expensive trailers that we'd worked on, and they were beautiful, and they were all lit up, but there wasn't anybody in them. And I got back down to where our little 12-foot hamster was, that was designed as a socializing trailer, and there was a crowd outside, and there were about 6 or 7 people in this little 12-foot trailer just hanging out, because it was just such a comfortable socializing space. And so having intention around the use, whether it's cooking or socializing or accommodating people in a bunkhouse or reading quietly and listening to music or playing music, all of those things are important considerations in terms of space planning. And done right, then you've allocated the right resources and the right space to the different uses. But be really conscious about how you're going to use it. It's a small space, it can't do everything, so prioritize how you want to use the space. I want to talk a little bit about design boards or mood boards or inspiration boards. We call them design boards here, and we use them for a couple of different reasons, and you can too, is we use them initially primarily to communicate with clients and to help with decision making. And so gathering materials ahead of time, fabrics, floors, finishes, different elements, and then putting them onto a physical board has a much different impact, in my opinion, and goes beyond what you're able to do in putting things into Pinterest or a notebook with photographs and printouts from the web. First of all, it's like colors are truer. when you actually have the physical material. Second of all, you can see how they relate to each other physically and visually. And third, you can actually feel things and see what textures are like and how the different textures relate to each other. So for our uses, we use them to communicate initially with our clients to help them make decisions. For your use, it can kind of be the same thing. It can let you try different combinations of things and help you communicate with the people that are part of your family or your social group or that are working to what it is you're planning, what you're planning on doing. And it's iterative. It can change over time, so don't feel like you're locked in, but collect things and put them on an inspiration or a design board. When I look for design inspiration for trailers, and this is not just specific to the design boards, but when I look for inspiration in general, I don't look at a lot of trailers. I've seen a lot of trailers and I look at a lot of trailers and there's some really brilliant stuff that's been done, but I'm not looking at trailers for design inspiration. I might look at trailers for how to solve a particular problem in terms of storage or fitting something or some mechanical issue. But in terms of design inspiration, I'm looking at things like fashion and commercial design, yacht building books, outdoors, and this again goes back to how's a client going to use it. If they're super outdoorsy people, then I'm going to look for references in the outdoors. If they're into kayaking, there's a whole culture around that, and it doesn't mean we put a kayak in the trailer. It just means that there's a way to look for references beyond what's already been done in other trailers. There's color choices, there's materials choices, there's textures that are different depending on who the client is, but I can find those kinds of inspiration in places other than what's already been done in trailers. So if you've been to a place that you love and that's super comfortable, it's a B&B or a campsite or a part of the world or a part of the country, think about what that was that gave you that sensation that you like, that you want to recreate. It could be an era of time that you're most comfortable with. You like the Roaring 20s, or you like the 70s. Those are really different references in terms of design features, and so look for things like that. Look at old album covers if you like the 70s or the 60s and that mood. Look at travel books if you think that Bavarian Germany is a particular feeling that you'd like to recreate. So there's lots of things like that, but my big point would be is don't just flip through or Google vintage trailer interiors. Look at yacht building, look at cars, look at periods of time, look at fashion, and find what's going on that can help you recreate the environment that you want to create. So again, the design boards are used for how things work together. There are going to be some foreground and background elements. They can be simple or they can be really complex, and I'll show you one here that this is for a excuse me, a really cool project. It's a 1955 Porsche motorhome. It's made in Germany. It's one of only 3 ever made, and it's here. There's a lot of pieces of the puzzle, but we're doing the interior on it. And this is the design board that is the final design board. We had 3 that we had different options on that we presented to the client, and from that we consolidated some things onto this one design board, and it shows fabrics. These are 2 accent fabrics, and I'll talk in a little bit more about kind of how to source these things. This is the primary upholstery fabric. This is going to be a paint or a laminate color, but I wanted to get the white that we want to use on here. So reference to the wood, the interior is going to be mostly teak, both in cabinetry and in wall coverings. This is the flooring. It's a woven textile flooring. When we did this and presented it, we actually brought along bigger samples that we could put down on the floor so they could walk on them and feel what it is. And that's when you get things like this, take your shoes off, step on it, see what it feels like in a trailer. This is a wall textile that's not really going to go on the walls, but it's going to go on some cabinet door faces. This is from a company called Chilwich. And this is because it's actually a motorhome. It has a cab. This is a square weave wool carpet that's going to go in the front area in the cab, which is a real traditional Porsche floor finishing in the front. And then this is a Porsche leather that we'll use to upholster the 2 bucket seats that we got from a 1955 Porsche Speedster that are going to go into the trailer. So this is kind of a literal, these are the materials and fabrics. But you get a reference to the period through some vintage fabrics that I'll talk about in a minute. These were actually designed in the 50s by Ray and Charles Eames, and they're still available from this company called Maharam, and so we're using those as a reference to the period of time. So it can be something very literal like this, but that still gives the feeling. The one behind it, this is a little more, this was more like an art project, and we were having a really hard time getting this client to make decisions so we could keep moving forward. We'd done all the infrastructure work we could do on the trailer, but we had to make decisions in terms of finishes and fabrics and things like that. So I made this design board. The interior was going to be all hickory. We knew that. So all the walls, all the cabinets, everything was going to be hickory. And so the board itself, the backing for the board itself is hickory, and then there's a piece of hickory here. In terms of getting a little more creative and not as literal, it's this trailer, they were calling it the writer's cabin, but it was going to go as an Airstream, and it was going to a Montana ranch, a fly fishing ranch in Montana. And so this is actually a map of the national forest in Montana where the trailer was going. And we're not going to put the map up on the wall, but it was a way of communicating to the client and remembering ourselves what's the context for where this trailer is going to be used. So there's the map that includes their ranch on it. Fly fishing ranch streams, and so we've got rocks and moss here to just remind them and let them know and remind ourselves of the context. But then it's also got things like backsplash options, laminate options, some reference to the lighting we're going to use. These are hardware pieces that we were going to use. This is a leather fabric that was being recommended and used for the upholstery. And then also some of the different fabrics that were going to be used for pillows and floor finishings and things like this. Actually had oak flooring, and so it combines something very literal with something a little more figurative. But the point is, if you put together a design board, be it something extravagant like this and artistic, something literal, it can be small. We've done them on small foam board pieces to communicate with clients just the choices that we wanted to make. It can be extraordinarily useful, and it's a fun, creative exercise in itself to kind of keep you in the mode of design and creativity. It can be updated as you move along, as you make different decisions, find new things that you want to incorporate. And the other part of it is you don't need to know exactly and in which quantities everything's going to be used for on a design board. So you might include a color that you really like without knowing where that color needs to be placed. And so you can use it as kind of a holding place for things that you want to incorporate without knowing specifically how they're going to be used yet. Use references in your design board, not just literal materials, and so rocks and feathers and photos and fonts that reference a period of time, maps like we did here. I'll give you an example of a little bit of a mismatch. We had a client that one of the things that she wanted to use her trailer that we were redesigning for was to play music with friends. So she had a lot of friends that played musical instruments, and they were going to get together on her trailer and they were going to play musical instruments. And so I put a photo of a small group of people playing musical instruments on her design board, and she turns out to be the most literal person I've ever met in my life. And her question was, and she couldn't quite get the concept, her question was, are you going to put a blown up photo of that in my trailer? And so the answer is no, obviously, but it was a way of communicating that we understood that music and friends was a big part of it. One other point I'll make is that, like, if the feel that you want, say it's you want someplace that's really serene, don't go to Michael's and buy a sign that says Serenity and put that up in your trailer. It's more about, where do you feel serene, not just command serenity, but where do you feel serene? Is it outdoors? Then make it feel like the outdoors. If it's If it's where you grew up, then reference that somehow. But use references, not just literal interpretations. So design boards, I think, are a really important part. They're really fun to do. We actually did an exercise in one of the in-person classes where we made design boards. I brought tons and tons of different fabrics and materials and samples and feathers and crazy stuff. And everybody had a hot glue gun, and we all put one together on a little bitty foam board. And it was super, super fun to do. So that's my recommendation, is do a design board. Let's talk a little bit about sourcing materials. And the most important thing I can tell you about sourcing materials is to plan ahead, and plan ahead so that you can end up with what you want. That's my point. It's if you're running down to Home Depot the day you're going to put your flooring down and expecting to find the perfect flooring, it may happen, but it's unlikely. The more likely thing that's going to happen is if you look at things that you like, that you find, that you see something like this and say, I want to try that out. I want to see what that's like. Plan ahead and order samples of the things that you are considering. And you might have to set up something with the design, the manufacturer, so that they'll send you samples. You might have to pay a couple dollars for them, something like that. But collecting those things in advance are really the keys to a thoughtful design. There's such a broad spectrum. There's such a number of really, really cool things out there that you won't find at the home stores. And if you're buying them, at a designer store, they're likely to be more expensive than if you're ordering samples and buying them online. So find manufacturers that you're interested in. I'll give you a couple of names to look up. Infinity Flooring, Infinity Woven Vinyl Flooring. We use it a lot, and it was originally manufactured for boat decks, so it's durable, it's comfortable, it's easy to clean. Chilliwich is another one, Chilewich, and you'll see their products in a lot of home stores. They make table runners and placemats, but they also make flooring and wall textiles, things like this, and they can give you samples as well. Maharam Fabrics, Maharam is Maharam. Go online, look at their products, order samples of those. We'll talk a little bit more about sourcing for finding deals on that stuff in a minute. Kohl's has fabrics. They're a traditional they've been around since mid-century. They're a great fabric company. So look in design magazines, look in yacht magazines, find references to different things, order samples of them, get them in ahead of time, and make your project your project, not just what was available the morning you decided you were going to do your upholstery and ran down to the upholstery store. We're lucky in San Diego. We have a place called Upholstery Fabric Outlet, and so they have roll ends and just a big warehouse full of rolls of fabric, and so we can go down there and find real upholstery fabric at pretty decent prices. But for things like feature elements in upholstery, I'm always ordering from the companies that I prefer, not just finding what's available. Finding bargains on that stuff is if you find, for example, if you find a Maharam fabric that you really like, it's going to have a product number and name on the back of it. And what I do when I find the product I like is the first thing I do is I Google it. And a lot of times what I'll find is remnants or roll ends on eBay. And instead of paying $210 a yard for these fabrics, I may find it for $60 or $70 a yard, which is still expensive, but if we're using it in small quantities, it's fine. So I don't always find them, and I don't always get it less expensively, but it's always the first thing I do. And so you could do the same thing. If you just want to have some accent pillows, but you really love a fabric that costs $250 a yard, Google it and see if somebody on eBay has some left over from another project at a huge discount. That's and I would say that with almost everything you look at. If you're going to buy a stove, find the model number, Google it, find out who's got it, who's got free shipping. Obviously look at their reviews and make sure they're credible, but look for bargains, and that's part of the pre-planning exercise for sourcing materials, is figure out what you want and then look around for it. Don't just try to go pick it up the day that you need it. It'll have a big impact. So the other part of that is in terms of sourcing materials, collect stuff. So if there's stuff that you think is cool, that you might have a use for without knowing exactly what it's going to be yet, is collect things. And I'll give you an example. A couple of years ago on eBay, there was a lot of vintage refrigerator emblems, and I bought all of them. And the purpose was to be able to use these in projects as a reference to something vintage. And so, for example, we put a new refrigerator in a project, and we painted it a vintage color. And then we took one of these and we put it on. It wasn't trying to fake anybody out. It was just so that we could have a modern appliance, but just in passing, it would have a reference as a vintage appliance. And so, refrigerator emblems, seashells, there can be any number of things, handles for cabinets, without knowing where it's going to go yet. If you find things you really love, buy them. I quite a few years ago, I bought, again on eBay, excuse me, some wool curtains that must have been from a boy's bedroom in the 50s. And they were in beautiful shape, and they were this cowboy theme, really nicely done wool curtains, and I had them for a couple of years, but then the right project came along for a client in Texas, and we cut them up and we made pillows out of them for the bedroom in a Spartan, and they were perfect. And I had no idea what I was going to use them for when I got them, but they ended up paying off with something that was super unique, and I didn't, run down to the fabric store and pick something just because it was there. We had these on hand that we could use later. So if you find things that you really love, even if you don't know how you're going to use them, and they're affordable, grab them and then find a place for them in your project. We had another client that he was a pilot, and he had a clock from the cockpit of a MiG jet fighter, and that got incorporated into the bar, this walnut bar, the top of the bar, that went into his project. So things like that can be really, really impactful and fun. So let's talk specifically about some materials. I mentioned, we'll talk first about flooring. I've mentioned this flooring, so we use it a lot, but we've also used engineered wood products. We've used vinyl, we've used marmoleum, we've used it all. And the thing to consider is one is kind of the look and feel of it. What do you like, and do you know enough about the different kinds of materials? So again, get samples. If you're looking at engineered wood products, you can go to Home Depot and get samples of them and see what they feel like. But also think about the installation process. Is it something that you're comfortable with handling yourself? Woven textile is a lot easier to install than marmoleum. Marmoleum is a really traditional product, and it's great, and it lasts a long time. But there's a bit of complexity to getting a template made and getting it installed without cracking it. So consider that. Consider also the dimensions of the material that you're going to use for flooring. Engineered wood products and wood products have thickness to them that, if your trailer wasn't designed with that, may create some clearance issues, particularly with the entry door, and then doors in other areas of the trailer if you're not completely gutting and redoing it. So think about the dimensions of the products you're using, and whether they're directional and things like that. And in addition to that is how clean a substrate do you need to put the product down. So marmoleum kind of telegraphs everything that's under it, so you need a completely flat, smooth surface to install it, where some of the other products you can get away with a little more, a little rougher surface to install them. There's adhesives and there's nail down and all kinds of different things to consider. So don't just think about the look, think about the feel, think about the installation process, think about what preparation needs to be done to make that product work. Fabric, to me, is such a big part of the design process. It's something that's in the foreground a lot of times. It's something that you feel because you're sitting on it, you may be laying on it, you may be sleeping on it, your hands are on it. It has a huge impact on your eye and on your comfort in the trailer. There are some really cool, vintage materials out there that were used in the 70s and things, but if you touch them, they feel super rough. They're not comfortable. They're really fibery, and so the hand of the material, I think, is an important consideration. With upholstery, also consider the density of the foam and the quality of the foam that you're going to use. Foam's gotten really expensive the last couple of years. And for things like sleeping areas, we're usually using a medium density foam with at least a 1-inch memory foam topper on it. Those are all considerations in terms of how your upholstery is going to come together. It's not a lot of thing that a lot of people do themselves, and so you can sometimes save money by sourcing the fabrics yourself through the method I talked about, and then providing it to an upholsterer. But you'll need to get an estimate of yardage from the upholsterer for the layout of the cushions that you're going to have. And so that's another part of the planning process, is to know which spaces are going to be upholstered and how much material and foam they're going to take. But fabric to me is just such a cool and fun and important part of the design process, and it's something that can change over time relatively easily by just recovering things. These fabrics, I mentioned the fabrics that we're using in this project. These are the ones that were originally designed in the 50s that are still manufactured. These are $210 a yard, but this is where the bulk of the fabric's going to be. And so 12 yards of this at something that's still expensive at $60 a yard, and then these used as pillows, and there's going to be 2 sets of them that can be interchanged. So think about things like that. Maybe your investment, your bigger investment, goes into something like pillows, and then your upholstery is something more subdued that's a little bit more in the background. We've used a lot of different surfaces for countertops over the years, and one of the go-tos is always laminates. These are Formica laminate samples. And again, I would recommend finding the different laminate manufacturers. Formica is one, Wilson Art is another. We use a company called Lab Designs a lot, L-A-B, Lab Designs a lot. And go online and order their samples, either individually or in these chip chains like this, and give yourself the ability to choose from more than the 5 or 6 things that are available in inventory locally at the home store. Laminates we use solid surface a lot. We get a real modern look with a 1/2-inch solid surface material, or quartz material they call it too. Without a big bullnose edge on it anymore. We don't do that. That's a little more complex to work with. The laminates we actually did, one of the years I did a workshop on laminating tabletops at the boot camp, and everybody got to make their own little tabletop. And it's really straightforward once you just have to get the hang of it. So laminates are not that daunting, and they're easy to edge with metal trim. Solid surface is a little harder to work with. I would stay away from, I generally stay away from tile in interiors and trailers. It's heavy and it's prone to cracking, and it's just bulky. I wouldn't use any stone products or marble. I just think it's physically it weighs too much, but also visually it's got a lot of weight to it. So those are kind of the considerations in terms of countertops. In terms of the walls and the ceiling in trailers, the really traditional Can-Ham finish is a varnish, an amber varnish, and it's doable. There's a little complexity to applying it. The conditions have to be right. It can't be too hot or it'll gum up, and so you have to get the hang of it. You might thin it a little bit, so that's certainly something that's do it yourself. Paint is always there. We use, in some cases we'll use wallpaper or wall textile, and it doesn't have to be in difficult places, like Airstreams have curved walls everywhere, and we don't put wallpaper on those, but on the bulkheads, which are flat, we'll use wallpaper or wall textile pretty frequently. This example, this was, and they're accents really. This was inside a bathroom on a wall that you'd only see when you were in the bathroom, and we've used similar things that are textured but not really vibrant on bulkhead walls, just to give a little bit different feeling than paint or wood surface. And these things they can be applied professionally, but putting up wallpaper on flat walls is not a big deal. So something to consider there. And again, if you're considering these things, get samples, find wallpaper manufacturers that you like and order samples from them. You can put them on your design board, you can hold them up in the space and kind of see what they feel like. The other part of this is to consider these things not just for walls and bulkheads, but things like door panels and refrigerator inserts. If you got a modern refrigerator but you stick something like something like this in there, all of a sudden you've got a vintage look that coordinates with the rest of the interior. So think about other places to use materials like that, instead of just stainless steel or black or white or what comes in the modern refrigerators, or wood. And also laminates work really well in refrigerator inserts without a lot of work. If you're considering things like this that are going to stick on the walls, consider the environment. If you're in a high humidity, high heat environment, it might not be the best choice, just because of the adhesion required. Last thing I'll talk specifically about, talk a little bit about appliances and fixtures. It goes back again, and you're tired of hearing from me about it, but it goes back to what's the plan, what's the use, how's it going to be used, and appliances have requirements for space and power and exhaust and waste, and so be very, very considerate about what you need in the project. Some people want a refrigerator, and sometimes it's electric, sometimes it's electric and propane, sometimes it's three-way with 12-volt power as well. And if it's propane, it needs to exhaust, which gets the gases out of the interior, things like that. So if you put together your list and it says, I need a fridge, I need a kitchen sink, I need a kitchen fixture, I need a hot water heater, I need a cooktop, I need a stove or oven, I need a microwave. You start doing all of that and you've got a 14-foot trailer, you might have to prioritize a little bit differently, but anything is okay as long as you're planning for it. So if you chose all of those things, then you've got a pretty big kitchen, and if your goal is to have a social space, then you might have compromised that goal or vision by adding too many appliances in. Same goes with bathrooms. If it needs to be a shower, if it needs to be a toilet, if it needs a sink in it of its own, if it needs a mirror in it, if it needs storage in it, then you've got a big box in your trailer someplace to accommodate all of that, which is fine, but just be conscious that if your goal is to have something minimalist, then maybe you've got a toilet and then that's it. But it's completely your call, but my point is just to plan ahead for those dimensions, power requirements, the visual space things take up, clearances that are required, etc. So the other part of it is when you're looking at appliances, they'll give you dimensions and cabinet cutouts and spaces and things like that, and that's all useful for your planning process. But to me, it's really important to have the appliances that you're going to be installing or building around on hand when you're actually doing your building, rather than building it to the sizes that show and then expecting everything to just slot into place. It can be a little more complex than that, even as far as making sure the things that you buy fit in through the door of your trailer, so that you can actually get them in and get them installed. So that I think covers everything that I was hoping to cover. The summary would be is to plan for your needs and your use, and so think it through, at least in a vision way. Things may change over time, but give thought to not what somebody else has done or what you saw that you thought was cool, but how are you going to use it, and what's really your vision, and where do you want to go with it, and who's going to be with you, and what are you going to be doing when you're there, and is it just about the project and not so much about the product? Do you want to just build things and create things and then move on, or is it really about getting on the road, which could mean a lot less complex project? It could mean buying a trailer that's mostly done as opposed to one that needs to be completely torn apart and put back together. These things take longer than we expect. Even as hundreds of times we've done it, it almost always takes longer than we anticipate to do. So if your goal is to get on the road, then get something that you can get on the road with. If your goal is to do a project, then that's great. If it's both, then allocate the time and plot out the horizon and figure out what you need to do it. Design to your style, and a style that you've thought through. So again, what are the references to the things that you think will make this feel the way that you want to feel when you're in it? Is it a period? Is it color? Is it texture? Is it something that feels outdoorsy? Is it something minimalist? Is it all about efficiency and storage? Is it luxury? All of those things are parts of what should go into your thought process of choosing what your style is that you want. And then fit those things in, being aware of the trade-offs, and how you'll use the space. And going back to my big space planning point is always leave things home. Don't feel like you have to have them with you on the road. Gather materials ahead of time, order samples, create a design board. If you run out the last minute to find stuff, you're not going to find necessarily the stuff that's perfect for your project, and that'll show up in your finished space. You can sit there and look at something after the fact and say, I wish I would done it differently, and that's something that I'd hope to avoid by going through kind of a planning and design process. Find bargains for the high dollar items, and use those for important design elements. And so, splurge on a fabric for pillows, or buy some teak, to build one thing that's the focal point. But use those things in ways that have a big impact. Don't feel like everything in the trailer has to be expensive and super high end. There's a lot of stuff that just goes into the background if you've got something really cool in the foreground. Create a design board. See how things work together, and to remind you of what your plan was as you go through it. Thanks so much for joining me. I hope it's been useful in your own planning and design process. If you'd like to see examples of some of the projects we've talked about in our work, our website is SoCalVintageTrailer.com, and on Facebook we're SoCal Vintage Trailer. On Instagram we're SoCal Vintage, one word. And thanks again for joining me at the Vintage Camper Trailers online Bootcamp Summit. Take care. Have fun.